On a blind date, they made fun of the black woman. But the CEO, who was a single father, shocked everyone by asking her to marry him. Take a look at this person. Finally, our Cinderella has shown up. Several heads turned as Jessica's high-pitched voice reverberated throughout the pricey eatery. She truly came, girls. When Kesha realized she was being filmed, she paused at Golden Oak's entryway, her stomach turning. Near the reserved table, 3 co-workers from the marketing firm where she worked were positioned strategically, as though she were a zoo animal, cell phones pointed towards her. Kesha Thompson, 29, was aware of a trap when she saw one. However, these affluent women would never comprehend what kept her shoulders straight and her gait decent. This sad act was nothing compared to the humiliations she had endured as a child. She gently replied, "Sorry, I'm late," to the lone other at the table. He was not what she had anticipated. He wasn't the hopeless loser Jessica had portrayed, but rather a kind-eyed man with a stance that betrayed far more than he actually was. He said, "I'm Michael," and rose courteously. From the corner of her eye, she saw Jessica muttering something to her pals, who were all laughing like hyenas. "And you must be Kesha. Please have a seat." Kesha recalled the exchange from 3 days prior, when Jessica had come up to her in the office, wearing the same phony smile. He deliberately requested a female like you, saying, "I have the perfect friend for you. Kesha, hardworking and discreet, you know?" There was no mistaking the patronizing tone. "For the 2 of you, I've already booked a table at Golden Oak. What about this Friday evening?" Kesha had been hesitant, but his instincts were triggered by something in Jessica's face that barely disguised malevolent satisfaction. She recognized that expression. It was the same one Jessica had when she failed to include Kesha in the meeting with the quarter's most significant client, or when she claimed credit. For the campaign, Kesha had developed entirely on her own. She had responded, "Sure, Jessica. It would be a pleasure," already preparing herself to handle whatever was about to happen. Now sitting across from Michael while listening to the malicious giggles from the next table, Kesha kept her expression serene. But inside, something was crystallizing, a calculated coldness that these women had the audacity to awaken in the wrong person. Michael seemed genuinely interested in conversation, asking questions about his work, his dreams. There was nothing desperate or pathetic about him. In fact, the more they talked, the more Kesha realized that Jessica had lied about pretty much everything related to this meeting. "May I ask how you know Jessica?" "Jessica? I don't know any Jessica," she said, leaning forward a little. Michael scowled. "My assistant who arranged this date said that a colleague of hers had asked him to introduce us, but she didn't mention any names." There it was. Confirmation that this whole thing was a complicated hoax to publicly humiliate her. Kesha felt a dangerous calm wash over her. The same calm that made people underestimate her, mistaking kindness for weakness. As Jessica and her friends continued their cruel pantomime, filming and whispering, Kesha grinned at Michael. They had no idea that they had just roused something that should have remained dormant, and that the woman they believed they were humiliating had secrets that would make this night the worst choice of their lives. If you're enjoying this story of justice and don't want to miss the moment when these women discover the price of cruelty, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because what's coming next will show that. Underestimating the wrong person can cost her much more than she ever imagined. My God, she's really trying to have a serious conversation with him. Jessica laughed loudly enough for several nearby tables to hear. "Girls, are you recording this? This is going to go viral in the office tomorrow." Kesha kept her expression serene as Jessica continued his pathetic show. But internally, something familiar was awakening. That same controlled coldness that had helped her survive far worse than these spoiled women would ever face. Michael noticed the tension and leaned in slightly. "Do you know these people?" he asked discreetly, his eyes showing genuine concern that Kesha hadn't expected. "Co-workers," she replied simply, taking a sip of his wine. "Apparently, they think setting up fake dates is a fun hobby." Michael's expression changed instantly. "Fake dates? Jessica told me you had specifically asked to meet a woman like me. Discreet, hard-working." Kesha made air quotes, his tone maintaining that dangerous calm. But you said her assistant set it up, not mentioning any names. Interesting, don't you think? Michael was visibly disturbed. I would never. My assistant received a call from someone identifying herself as your friend, saying you were interested in meeting me. I hesitated, but you accepted because it seemed genuine. Kesha finished studying her reaction. There was something about Michael that didn't fit with the desperate loser Jessica had described. His watch, discreet, but clearly expensive. The way the waiter had greeted him by name. The ease with which he had chosen the wine without even looking at the prices. Across the restaurant, Jessica was getting bolder. Look, now they're whispering as if it were romantic. Someone should warn her that men like that only want one thing from a woman like her. Instead, she smiled. Not a warm smile, but something that made Michael realize there was much more to this woman than met the eye. May I ask what you really do, Michael? And you? She asked, radically altering the discussion. Run a few businesses, he murmured hazily. Jessica mentioned marketing, but I get the impression you're much more than just a marketing employee. Kesha tilted her head. It was an interesting question coming from someone who was also being evasive about his profession. You have good intuition. I do work in marketing, yes, but I also have other interests. What Michael didn't know, and what Jessica certainly hadn't discovered in her superficial research to set this trap, was that Kesha Thompson wasn't just another employee trying to survive in a hostile corporate environment. She had grown up in Chicago, her daughter of a single mother who cleaned offices at night to pay the bills. But unlike what people like Jessica imagined, his mother wasn't just a cleaning lady. She was a woman with an MBA who had been systematically passed over at every company she worked for, until she decided that dignity was worth more than corporate hypocrisy. My mother always taught me that when people like her, Kesha nodded discreetly in Jessica's direction, show you who they really are. You ought to trust her. More significantly, you ought to record it. Michael scowled. Keep a record of it. Kesha smiled again, this time with a sparkle in her eyes that made his stomach flutter with anticipation. Let's just say I learnt early on that underestimating someone based on appearances can be very, very costly. At that moment, Jessica rose from the table, clearly intoxicated by her own cruelty, and walked towards them. Sorry to interrupt such a special meeting, she said, placing her hand on Kesha's shoulder in a gesture that was meant to seem friendly, but was pure condescension. Just wanted to make sure you two are getting along. Kesha, I hope you're not being overly dramatic, dear. When a woman strives to be more than she is, some men are put off. The ensuing hush was deafening. While Kesha stayed motionless, Michael gazed at Jessica with a glance she couldn't quite read. However, Jessica would have seen that Kesha's hands were too loose, her breathing too regulated, and her posture too assured for someone being humiliated if she had been listening. Kesha finally said, Jessica, in a voice so endearing that it was risky. Are you sure you want to continue with this? Because once certain doors are opened, they can never be closed again. For a moment, something in Kesha's tone made Jessica hesitate, but her arrogance won out, and she laughed. Wow, how dramatic. Relax, Kesha, it's just a bad date. It happens to the best of us. Well, to some more than others. What Jessica didn't realize was that every word, every cruel gesture, every moment of public humiliation was being carefully stored in the mind of a woman who had learnt early on that patience was not weakness. It was strategy. And people who confused kindness with vulnerability were about to discover the difference between being underestimated and being an underestimator. As Jessica returned to her table, laughing with her friends and pointing his cell phone at him again, Kesha looked at Michael. Still want to stay for dessert? She asked, as if nothing had happened. But Michael had noticed something that Jessica was completely unable to see. In Kesha's eyes, there was no humiliation or shame. There was something much more dangerous. There was the calmness of someone who had just decided that the time for kindness was over and that some lessons needed to be taught in the most public and devastating way possible. As Jessica returned to her desk, celebrating her victory, Kesha did something completely unexpected. She gently pulled out her cell phone and began typing, not with haste or nervousness, but with a calculated precision of someone executing a plan that had been in motion for much longer than anyone in that room could have imagined. "Are you okay?" Michael asked, noticing her sudden focus on his phone. "Perfectly," Kesha replied, without looking up. "Just making some notes for future reference." What Michael couldn't see was that Kesha wasn't just typing. She was accessing an Instagram account that Jessica didn't know existed. An account where over the past 6 months she had meticulously documented every racist comment, every cruel joke, every moment of discrimination in the office. Not out of paranoia, but out of strategy. Kesha had learnt early on that people like Jessica leave traces. They always do. And when you grow up being underestimated because of her color, her background, her place in society, you learn that documentation is his best friend. Because the word of a black woman against that of a privileged white woman is rarely enough. "Can I ask you something?" Michael leaned forward a little as he spoke. "For someone who is receiving this treatment, you appear to be pretty composed. It's amazing." Kesha finally looked up, and Michael saw something that made he realize he had seriously underestimated the woman sitting across from him. "Michael, have you heard of Thompson and Associates? The human resources consulting firm?" "Sure. They handle workplace discrimination cases for large corporations." Michael paused, processing. "Wait. Thompson." "Kesha Thompson, founder," she said simply, handing him an elegant business card. "I don't just work in marketing, Michael. I own the company I work for. And Jessica just gave me the most perfect case study I could ask for." Michael's expression changed completely. You're the woman who sued 3 of the biggest companies in town for racial discrimination and won them all. Among other things, yes." Kesha smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of a predator who had just realized that her prey had willingly walked into the perfect trap. At that moment, across the restaurant, Jessica was standing again, cell phone in hand, openly recording as she made comments she found hilarious for her friends. "Guys, look at this. She really thinks she has a chance with a man like he is. It's almost sad, right?" What Jessica didn't realize was that the waiter serving wine at the next table had completely stopped what he was doing. David Martinez, night manager at Golden Oak, was also a law student at the local university, and he recognized Kesha Thompson immediately. 6 months ago, she had given a lecture to his class on strategic documentation in workplace discrimination cases. He remembered every word, especially when she said, "Racists always feel safe in spaces they consider his." That overconfidence is always her downfall. David discreetly approached Kesha's table. "Ms. Thompson. I'm David Martinez. I study law at Central University. You gave a lecture to my class last semester." "David, of course. I remember you," Kesha replied warmly. "How are your studies going?" "Very well, thank you." "Listen," he lowered his voice. "I just heard her make several extremely explicit racist comments about you, and I have an audio recording of everything. The restaurant sound system records conversations for quality control if you need it." Kesha and Michael exchanged glances. "David, could he do me a favor? Do you have access to tonight's recordings?" "Yes, I do. And also to the security camera footage. Everything is recorded. The filming she did without consent, the racist comments, the verbal harassment, everything." Michael watched in fascination as Kesha quietly coordinated her response. In a matter of minutes, she had turned what should have been a public humiliation into an evidence-gathering operation that would make any labor lawyer proud. "You know what's most interesting about all this?" Kesha said to Michael as David discreetly prepared the documentation. "Jessica works at Sterling Marketing, right? Well, Sterling Marketing has a multi-million-dollar contract with the city for diversity and inclusion campaigns. Just imagine the irony." Michael began to laugh, not out of amusement, but out of sheer admiration. "Did you plan this?" "Not exactly," Kesha admitted. "But I knew Jessica would eventually reveal herself completely. People like her can't help themselves when they believe they're in a position of power. I just needed the right setting and the right witnesses." Meanwhile, Jessica had escalated her performance even further, now making comments about women who don't know their place loud enough that several other tables began to feel uncomfortable. Some customers were already asking for his check and leaving, visibly disturbed by the scene. The most amazing thing, Kesha continued, is that Sterling Marketing doesn't even know what she does. They think she's the model employee, always polite, always professional. But casual racists like Jessica have one thing in common. They always believe that all white people think like he does. Michael shook his head, impressed. So, you really turned what should have been his worst night into the biggest professional opportunity he's had this year. Kesha finished. And Jessica is providing all the material for free. David returned to the table with a discreet envelope. The recordings are here, Ms. Thompson. And I have 3 witnesses from the staff who saw everything and are willing to testify if necessary. Kesha carefully tucked the envelope into her purse, next to the screenshots of the Instagram stories Jessica had posted throughout the night, all containing hashtags that made the discrimination impossible to deny. Now, she said, looking at Michael with a gleam in her eyes that he was beginning to recognize, how about we finish our dinner? Because tomorrow, Jessica is going to find out that some people are much more dangerous when underestimated, and that proper documentation can turn a night of cruel entertainment into the biggest misjudgment of a career. Michael smiled, finally understanding completely who he was dining with. She wasn't a victim disguised as a cruel joke. She was a seasoned strategist who had just turned his enemy's arrogance into his own ammunition. As Jessica continued his show, completely oblivious to the fact that every word was being recorded and catalogued by a woman who had built a career destroying the careers of people just like her. Kesha calmly ordered dessert because, after all, justice is best served as a full meal, and she couldn't wait for the main course. What Jessica didn't know was that Kesha Thompson wasn't just a successful human resources consultant. She also ran a popular blog with over 500,000 followers, all interested in real-life cases of workplace discrimination. And tomorrow, Sterling Marketing would find out that her model employee had just become a viral case study on how corporate racism manifests itself when people believe they are safe. The next morning, Jessica arrived at the Sterling Marketing office with the same smug smile as always, still reveling in the video she had posted the night before. What she didn't expect was to find the entire human resources team gathered in the conference room along with 2 lawyers she didn't recognize. With a cold look she had never seen before, HR Director Margaret Chen said, "Jessica Moore, I need you to come with us, please." "Sure, Margaret. Is something wrong?" Jessica laughed nervously, but something about the deathly silence in the office made his stomach knot. A presentation was already being projected onto the screen in the conference room. The first slide featured the logo of Thompson and Associates next to a professional photo of Kesha, which was definitely not taken at Golden Oak the previous evening. The picture showed her wearing an immaculate executive suit with the title Founder and CEO, Workplace Discrimination Specialist. Jessica felt th. The slide shifted to screenshots of Jessica's Instagram stories, where she had tagged the location, used derogatory hashtags, and made legally indefensible comments. No, Jessica stammered, her hands shaking. That was just a joke. Last night, Ms. Jessica Moore was captured on video and audio engaging in explicit racial discrimination against Kesha Thompson, a potential client of Sterling Marketing, who is one of the most well-known human resources consultants in the nation. She is not a customer of the business. In fact, Dr. Hamilton continued impassively. Ms. Thompson was hired by the city 3 months ago to audit all companies that provide diversity and inclusion services to the municipality, including Sterling Marketing. Jessica's world fell apart in that moment. The city contract represented 40% of the company's annual revenue. It was the project that had secured bonuses for all employees, including his. Margaret spoke up, her voice sharp as a knife. "Jessica, not only did you publicly humiliate an official auditor, but you documented your own racist behavior on social media. Sterling Marketing could lose a $8 million contract because of your joke. I can explain." Jessica was starting to panic, cold sweat running down her back. "I didn't know who she was." "If I had known exactly," interrupted Dr. Hamilton, Opening a folder full of documents, Mr. Thompson provided us with these audio recordings, where you clearly state that you organized the meeting as a public humiliation, referring to her with documented racially derogatory terms. The audio began to play, and Jessica's voice echoed through the room with devastating clarity. "Look who's here. Our Cinderella has finally shown up," followed by cruel laughter and comments that got progressively worse. "Stop, please stop." Jessica was crying now, realizing that every word buried her deeper. But Margaret wasn't finished. In addition, we discovered that it was he who used company resources, our corporate account at Golden Oak, our reservation system, even Sterling had to orchestrate this personal vendetta. Jessica opened and closed her mouth like a fish out of water. "Personal vendetta? What are you talking about?" The investigation revealed that you discovered that Kesha Thompson had been hired as an auditor 3 months ago. Margaret continued, consulting her papers. "You deliberately orchestrated this situation to try to discredit her before she could complete her audit of our company." "That's a lie. I never." Jessica stopped mid-sentence, realizing that the more she spoke, the worse her situation became. Dr. Hamilton smiled coldly. "We also have records of his research on the company's system for Kesha Thompson, consultant 3 weeks before the meeting. His fingerprints are all over this case, Miss Moore." At that moment, the door opened and Kesha Thompson entered the room, no longer wearing the simple clothes from the night before, but an executive suit that radiated authority and professional competence. She carried a leather briefcase and walked with the confidence of someone who had just won at WARM's Thompson. Margaret stood up respectfully. "Thank you for coming." Kesha sat calmly at the head of the table, directly across from Jessica. "Margaret, Dr. Hamilton, I hope you've had enough time to review all the material I provided." With a mix of fear and late recognition, Jessica gazed at her. "All of this was planned by you." "You actually planned all of this, Jessica," Kesha said, in a composed tone. "I just wrote down what she did. According to established legal procedures, every derogatory utterance, discriminating gesture, and instance of public humiliation he planned was documented." Kesha took out her briefcase and started handing out copies of an in-depth report. "This is my initial assessment of Sterling Marketing's workplace. It is predicated on 6 months of covert monitoring, employee interviews, and, of course, the actual instance of racial discrimination that we saw last night." His face paled with every page as Margaret flipped through the report. "Christ Jesus. Beyond the incident from last night, the study exposes a systematic pattern of discrimination." Jessica was shaking now, really seeing the extent of what she had unleashed. Kesha went on, "Black employees consistently passed over for promotions, casual racial comments normalized in the workplace, and a system of jokes that creates a hostile environment for minorities. You can't do that." "I have rights," Kesha calmly retorted. "You have the right to hire an employment lawyer, since I will be submitting a formal complaint to the State Department of Civil Rights, in addition to the report to the city. Naturally, this case will be covered by my 500,000 follower legal blog, which focuses on institutionalized corporate racism." Dr. Hamilton bent over. "More, Ms., given the gravity of the situation and the possible harm to Sterling Marketing's finances and image, the business has made the decision to immediately end his contract. No severance, no notice, and a reference letter that appropriately details the reasons behind her termination. I cannot get fired for this." Jessica lost all her composure and burst. "It was only one night. A dumb joke." Kesha rose elegantly. "Jessica, I want you to understand something," Margaret stated icily, "not to mention the potential lawsuits that are sure to follow. It's a stupid prank that could cost the company $8 million in cancelled contracts. Because you thought that his social standing, connections, and skin color would shield him from the repercussions of his behavior. You attempted to degrade me last night. You were mistaken." Jessica was crying uncontrollably now, her makeup running, all her arrogance turned to pure despair. "The difference between us," Kesha continued, "is that while he used his energy to destroy other people, she used hers to build a career that allows her to destroy entire systems of discrimination. He messed with the wrong person, Jessica. Margaret escorted Jessica out of the room as she still babbled incoherent apologies and empty legal threats. Sterling Marketing had a public relations crisis to manage, contracts to try to save, and a reputation to rebuild. Kesha remained in the room for a few more minutes, calmly organizing her papers. Through the window, she could see Jessica being escorted out of the building, carrying a cardboard box with his personal belongings. Completely devastated by the magnitude of the consequences he had brought upon himself. While Jessica discovered that actions have prices we are not always prepared to pay. Kesha opened her laptop to update a case that would become legendary in legal circles. How one night of racial cruelty turned into the complete downfall of a career built on arrogance and privilege. But what would happen when Jessica tried to rebuild her life, only to discover that her reputation had preceded her throughout the industry?